since they've closed the horse slaughter sites.
Oh, I knew that subject was going to come up, horse slaughter plants. Well, it's been an absolute disaster. They closing down horse slaughter plants. You've got so many horses going down to Mexico. The lucky ones get to go to Canada. Yeah, and the slaughter plants up there got caught doing some bad things, and you know, using too many prods and hitting the horse in the face with whips and the stunning not working right. I'm a big fan of video auditing slaughter plants. The Cargill Corporation has been a pioneer and has now put in video auditing in all of their beef and pork plants in North America. And people over the internet in another state can look into the stunning area and the unloading ramp and the chute area at any time. Also, the corporate office can look in at any time. And they score it. And they watch 100 cattle go through and how many they stun on the first shot, how many they poke with a prodder, how many fell down. They're actually scoring this stuff. And there's some other companies. Right now, a bunch of other companies are looking at this. And I would strongly recommend that the plants that you use put something like this in. And it's essential that it be monitored by somebody outside the plant. 25 years ago, I put in the first video cameras. It was at the old John Morrell plant in Sioux Falls. And we had a the TV down in the manager's office that worked great. And then it broke, and the novelty wore off, and it wasn't maintained. It's got to have the discipline of outside auditing agency looking at it. You know, and I've worked with, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but somebody outside has to be looking at it. They've got to be sending reports in, and if the cameras are messed up, then they got to be fixed. The auditing agency will give you a report saying, well, the camera on the unloading dock's filthy dirty or it's broken, and then you got to get it fixed. But one thing I'm sick and tired of is there's certain people, the minute your back's turned, they're doing stuff. And the slaughter plant's such a critical area that and with all the cell phone cameras and everything today, I want to really, you know, watch over that. You know, the thing with the horse slaughter thing, it's something that was well-intentioned, but it really backfired. It's, this is the problem I'm seeing more and more of. People are making policy who are totally separated from the reality in the field. And this problem is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. On the other hand, I think we have to look at everything that we do in animal agriculture and say, now if you brought your wedding guests out there from the city, what are they going to think? Now, a well-run cattle and pig slaughter plant passes that test. I've taken a lot of people through them. And I always have them go out there and watch the animals go up the chute, and they're kind of amazed that they go up the chute quietly. And it's been interesting. In January and February, I had to do I did 2 solid months almost of book and movie tour. I had to go to all these premieres, go to all Barnes and Nobles and other places like in New York and places like that, talk to the public. And one of the most interesting press conferences I had was out in Hollywood for the movie. They had this great big conference for all of the cable TV. Like every cable TV channel was showing off their stuff for the next year, and the press got to look at it. And of course, they were showing off the Claire Danes movie, and they had a big conference with about 100 reporters there. And we were up sitting at a table, and there was Claire, there was me, there was Mick Jackson, the director, and the producer. You know what those reporters wanted to talk about? They wanted to talk about how cattle were raised, how do slaughter plants work. And they weren't attack questions, they were curiosity. You see, that entertainment press was much more representative of the general public, especially since they were there for a meeting of just every kind of cable channel. And they were just curious. And the moderator had to cut it off so that they could get some movie questions. But the reporters also asked a ton of autism questions, too. Okay?
Tone of voice. If you have an animal who gets a fear reaction, is it more useful to use what kind of tone of voice?
Tone of voice. This is a really important. The tone of voice, animals pick up on that. You know, low, calm tone of voice, that tends to be calming. The high-pitched kind of screaming, that gets the animal excited. There was some research done that showed that screaming in the ear of cattle was as stressful as an electric prod. Cattle also, that was work done by Jeffrey Russian, and another experiment done by Joe Stuckey, another scientist up in Canada. He found that cattle differentiate between the sound of people screaming and the sound of a gate slamming. And people screaming and whistling made the heart rate go up a whole lot more than just gates banging and slamming. They know the difference. Now, you know, be calm. You know, an animal also can be calmed down just by the tone of voice of the familiar person that they trust. You can have an animal raging at the fairgrounds. He's now run down through the midway, and you get somebody that animal knows. They can walk in there and just lead that animal away, because now he sees the person that he knows, and he hears the voice of the person that he knows. And they know the difference between the voice of the good person that's been good to them and the voice of the bad person that's been bad to them. But they're very sensitive to the tone of voice. If you went up to your dog and you went, good dog, like that, I don't think your dog's going to respond very well with that. You see, they're very, very sensitive to the tone of voice.
So in a dog, if you have a dog with a fear reaction, is it, oh, it's okay, or it's okay?
Well, if you have a dog that has a fear reaction, one of the things you want to try to do is really praise confident behavior. You know, I think it's okay to soothe them some, but you don't want to get to where only time you're really fussing over the dog is when he's cowering at a thunderstorm, because then you can actually reinforce, that behavior. But on the other hand, you don't want to be totally callous and not try to calm him down at all. But if he shows any glimmer of, not cowering, that you want to try to reward. And there seems to be an awful lot of problems these days with thunderstorm phobias that we never used to have before. And I think animals are leading too sheltered a life. When I was a child, all the dogs lived outside, and we didn't have all these behavior problems because they were socialized to people and they were socialized to toddlers. It's extremely important for dogs to be socialized to toddlers, because a little kid is a different picture. And I just saw a news banner just the other night that some pit bulls killed a toddler. I think it was in California. And they probably hadn't been socialized to toddlers. See, it's a different picture. I've seen pigs where the person never walked inside the pig pen. This was in indoor pigs. And the animals differentiate between a person in the alley and a person in the pen. And I've seen pigs show up at a meat plant where the pens have never been walked. They're crazy, because they just get terrified when somebody walks in the pen. To a horse, a man on the back is different than a man on the ground. So if the horse is abused by the rider, he might be fined for veterinarian shoeing. Now, if the farrier beat him up, he might be horrible for groundwork, but be good about riding. You see, on the ground and off, on the ground and on the back, that's like two different file folders in the animal's brain. A dog, for example, thinks when he's on the leash, he's got to protect you. When he's off, he can play. You teach the service dog that when the vest is on, it's work, and when the vest is off, it's play. And it's important not to confuse the service dog. I was at an autism meeting, and they had the dog rolled over, and they're playing it with the vest on. And I said, no, slip the vest off if you want to do that. The dog has got to learn what behaviors you do with the vest on and what behaviors you do with the vest off. And don't confuse the dog, because you're going to confuse the dog if you do that. Okay, right there.
Share with us how you answered some of the media questions about a dairy cow's life in a cattle versus a dairy cow's life in an organic dairy farm.
Well, I got asked. They asked a lot of questions about feed yards, and one of the problems, there's two big problems you've had in feed yards. You've got mud and you've got heat stress. Mud, you can actually solve that problem with sloping the yard correctly. Heat stress, you're going to have to give them some shades. And the big heavy black cattle are the ones most susceptible to heat stress. Bulls are also more susceptible to heat stress because you have more body mass in relation to the surface area is smaller in relation to the body mass. And black animals, I don't care what kind of animals they are, they're going to get hotter. And they asked us a lot of questions just about how things worked. Because I have seen feed yards done well. And I often get asked, how come you still stay in the industry? And in my book, Animals Make Us Human, I have an afterword. Why am I still in the industry? When I first started out in the beef industry, yes, and I started out in feed yards. We called them feed yards back then. And it was in Arizona. We got 6 inches of rain every year. The feed yards were bone dry. They were not dusty. The cattle stayed spotlessly clean. And they all had shade. Every yard in Southern California and Arizona has had shade, always has had shade. In fact, for the first 5 years of my career, I thought, well, all feed yards have shade. Found out that wasn't the case. And the handling was atrocious back then. Absolutely atrocious handling. But the living conditions for those cattle actually were decent. And then, you know, if I had been first introduced to muddy feed yards, I would have had a very negative view. In fact, Michael Poland's steer was probably hock deep in mud, and he had a very negative view of that. You know, filthy, dirty animals, hock deep in mud. But, you know, I've been on little farms too where they've been hock deep in mud. You know, so it can happen in both places. And this is why I'm going to use the same thing. I want to measure the same things, whether it's big or it's little. Cleanliness of your animal, lesions, lameness, body condition score of the animal, lice and external parasites. Now, some people now are using these compost-bedded packs, and Wendy's research showed that those are really good on lameness. Now, one of the problems you can have with that system is people don't use enough bedding. Let's take straw-bedded pigs. I've seen muck holes because they're not using enough bedding. No, they've got to have clean places to sleep. And I've seen some really disgusting messes. I went on a train in England, and I got to see sort of the backside of a lot of these outdoor pigs, and I saw a lot of rutted out muddy moonscapes where there was no pasture. It was just a mess. And they have all kinds of rules and stuff, but nobody had actually inspected it to see whether it actually had pasture. If your system requires pasture, you got to make sure they actually have pasture. That they don't have mud pies instead of pastures or just empty dirt lots. You got to do what you actually say that you're doing. Now, what I see happening in the industry is I see the niche markets, the thing, you know, the organics, naturals. I see this expanding, 25-30% of the market. But then we still got to have a big, regular, large-scale commercial. And I told people at the Beverly Hills Four Seasons, fanciest hotel in Hollywood, I told them there's maids in this hotel and they need affordable eggs. And what I think is going to happen is I think a lot of ideas from organic are going to get incorporated into large-scale commercial, where they'll still be using some chemicals but a lot less. I kind of get sick of the fight between the two. I work with both of them, and they both have their place, and they both have their problems and their things that need to be improved. I have to say one thing I'm going to rag on the organic on is internal and external parasites. I've seen way too many cattle with big, huge bald spots. Okay?
Could you speak about your autism?
Well, I've got an autism talk coming up after this.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And it's going to be
Sorry.
over in the main building.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And I'll be talking about autism then. Now, the thing is, autism is a very big continuum, going from somebody who's going to remain nonverbal all the way up to somebody that's, you know, that's a genius. I mean, Einstein would be diagnosed with autism today. Tesla would be, the inventor of the power plant, would be diagnosed with autism. And there's a lot of kind of geeky, quirky, kind of nerdy kids. And a lot of them can get really good careers out on the farm. It's a great, you know, place for them, a great place for them to be. And I'm seeing too many of these quirky, nerdy kids, nobody's working on kind of developing their abilities. They tend to have uneven skills. They'll be good at one thing, bad at something else. We've got to build up the thing they'll be good at. And when kids are like 12 or 13 years old, we've got to start thinking, well, what are they going to be when they grow up? We're not doing anywhere near enough on career development.